Last week, I was scrolling through a niche forum where South Korean political insiders gather, and I came across a thread that felt less like a news report and more like a post-mortem of a failed heist.
A failed heist. That's a strong way to put it.
Well, one user described watching the drone incident unfold from a quiet cafe in Seoul. He said the atmosphere wasn't one of genuine national panic, but of a strange, weary recognition.
Like they'd seen this movie before.
Exactly. Like watching a fading lead actor attempt one last dangerous stunt because he knows the audience is walking out. And he pointed out something chilling.
Okay.
When the details emerged about the government allegedly trying to provoke North Korean fire just to manufacture a security crisis, the shark wasn't that it was possible, but how clumsy the script felt.
Right. For decades, the world has pointed to Seoul as this, ultimate success story. The gold standard for transplanting Western democracy into East Asia.
We were told the ballot box was the cure for the region's authoritarian ghosts. But then you look at the reality behind the curtain.
And it's a very different picture.
You have a leader, a former elite prosecutor who spent his life enforcing the law. Yet he allegedly treated the DMZ, one of the most volatile borders on Earth, like a disposable prop in a political survival game.
My contact in Seoul called it political cannibalism.
Political cannibalism, that's it. In the morning, these leaders give soaring speeches about freedom and the rule of law. By evening, they're reportedly calculating whether a few artillery shells from the north might be enough to justify a crackdown on their domestic rivals.
It's this jarring disconnect that stays with you.
It does. You have a society capable of building world-class semiconductors and global cultural icons, yet its political heart is stuck in this loop of retribution politics, where the only way to avoid a prison cell after your term ends is to, burn the house down while you're still inside.
And that forces a question that most are too afraid to ask. Is this just a string of bad luck with leaders, or is there a fundamental rejection happening deep within the system?
Because when the highest form of democratic survival becomes a gamble with a nuclear-armed neighbor, the performance hasn't just gone wrong. The entire theater might be structurally unsound. That sets the stage for a critical deep dive. Our mission today is to move beyond the surface-level politics and understand precisely why a nation capable of all this innovation seems stuck in this perpetual loop.
This loop of retribution politics and systemic gridlock.
Exactly. We are analyzing South Korea's struggle to achieve true democratic stability, looking squarely at the cultural and political factors driving this chronic volatility.
And to gain perspective, we'll explore some alternative governance models. We're specifically contrasting Korea's trajectory with Singapore's.
To really determine if, in certain cultural contexts, technocratic efficiency just gets prioritized over these endless procedural battles, this is about asking, is the system itself structurally unsound?
It's a deep inquiry because South Korea really does present a paradox. On one hand, it's achieved what many scholars thought was nearly impossible, a successful transition out of military dictatorship into a civilian-led, free electoral system.
Right.
Yet you're forced to acknowledge this profound disconnect between the form of democracy and the substance of a liberal political culture.
Okay, let's unpack the core concepts first. When we talk about South Korea as an unconsolidated democracy, what are we actually looking for? Is just holding free and fair elections enough?
Not at all. Not even close. You really have to look at this through two lenses.
Right.
The first is the minimalist behavioral definition. It's often associated with Adam Przeworski.
Okay.
And his view is very practical. A democracy is consolidated when it becomes, and this is the key phrase, the only game in town.
The only game in town.
Right. The crucial element here is behavioral acceptance. It means all the big political players, especially those who lose elections, accept the institutions as the legitimate framework. You lose, you don't stage a coup, you don't try to sabotage the system, you just commit to trying again within the rules.
So acceptance of the rules, even when you lose, that's the absolute bedrock.
Precisely.
Okay.
But then you move to the positive or substantive concept of consolidation. This is championed by figures like Larry Diamond and Do Chol Shen.
And what's their take?
They argue that consolidation has to be about the quality of the democracy, not just its survival. This means you're looking at things like high degrees of accountability, transparency, the rule of law.
The actual performance of the system.
Exactly. Positive consolidation requires that everyone, from the elites to the general public, really believes that the democratic regime is the best system for their society, better than any, realistic authoritarian alternative.
And based on what we're seeing, South Korea has arguably cleared that minimalist bar, they have elections, the military stays in the barracks, but they struggle profoundly with that qualitative, substantive definition.
That is the core tension. South Korea's procedural success is immense. I mean, free elections, firm civilian supremacy over the military. That's huge. However, the nation remains far from what you'd call a truly liberal democracy.
And what's fascinating is how it all happened.
Yes. Democratization began post-1987 by prioritizing free elections before key institutions like the rule of law or governmental accountability were fully established and, internalized.
So the cart was put before the horse. They got the ballot box right away.
Right.
The institutional checks and balances, the stuff that makes it all work, that needed time to mature. And that delay created a structural weakness.
It did. It meant that the behavioral norms never fully took root. So while the procedure is there, that substantive consolidation is, well, it's still pretty remote in some crucial ways.
And we see this play out
immediately.
Yeah.
You see it in the epidemic of unilateralism and zero-sum politics within the National Assembly. I mean, democracy relies on everyone getting used to resolving conflicts according to the rules, where compromise is valued.
But in Korea?
In Korea, there's this continuous, almost standard pattern of the ruling party just bypassing the National Assembly through unilateral votes. It shows a systemic failure of accountability and compromise, and it just reinforces this destructive zero-sum mentality.
And looking at the history, this isn't just one or two isolated incidents, is it? It's a sustained pattern.
It's an alarming consistency. The pattern started almost right after the transition. In 1988, you had unilateral legislative votes. In 1990, that controversial three-party merger happened without any real deliberation.
But the 1996 event with the labor and security laws, that seems like a major turning point.
It was a profound violation of norms. The ruling party pushed these vital national laws through in a 5-minute session. At 6 a.m. on December 26th, they deliberately excluded the opposition.
Wow.
This was so blatant, so damaging, that critics started calling the government a civilian dictatorship. It sparked massive popular protests that eventually forced the government to revise the laws.
So that episode, really early on in their democratic era, it set a terrible precedent.
It did. It sent the message that if you have the majority, the institutional norms are, well, they're disposable.
And that willingness to just shatter the rules continued well into the new century.
Absolutely. Unilateralism was there. In 1999, it reappeared during the controversial 2004 impeachment of President Roh Moo-hyun, and critically, during the 2008 to 2011 period.
What happened then?
You had unilateral votes on the state budget and the crucial ratification of the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. That 2011 FTA vote descended into literal chaos. An opposition lawmaker actually threw tear gas in the chamber to try and stop it.
Tear gas on the floor of the legislature. When political disagreement gets to that point, it's a powerful sign that the norms of compromise have just utterly failed.
It has to fundamentally undermine the political parties themselves.
It does. It leads to this incredibly volatile party system defined by weakness and personal relation. Korean political parties don't really function as stable aggregators of societal interests or ideologies.
So what are they?
They operate primarily as the short-term political tools of their leaders.
Tools of their leaders. That sounds incredibly short-lived.
They are shockingly ephemeral. The average life expectancy of political parties between 1987 and 2000 was just 31.5 months.
31 months. That's barely long enough to get the paperwork filed. It's less like a governing party and more like a pop-up shop for a political boss.
That's a great way to put it. Key leaders, the three Kims, Kim Young-sam, Kim Dae-jung, and Kim Jong-pil, they continuously created, dissolved, and recreated parties just to suit their personal needs.
And that constant mutation reinforces this political bossism, this instability, and it just breeds deep public cynicism. Why would you bother with ideology if the entire party might be scrapped next year?
Exactly. And all of this inherent instability converges with the structural trap baked right into the executive branch. The 5-year single-term presidency.
The single-term trap.
The effects of that 5-year single-term limit are just devastating for any kind of coherent long-term governance. First, the structure incentivizes short-term, crowd-pleasing policies aimed purely at immediate voter interests.
And it inevitably neglects necessary, sometimes painful, long-term national planning.
Yeah.
If you know you've only got 5 years, you're not going to invest your political capital in a 20-year project.
You won't be there to take the credit.
Right. Second, it fractures the entire political process into these discontinuous, rigidly separated periods. Each administration is basically incentivized to dismantle and redo the work of the one before it.
So policy continuity is weaponized.
It prevents any institutional learning. The concept of building on a predecessor's successes is often replaced by the need to just erase their legacy entirely.
And what about the president's actual power during their term? How does this rule affect them?
This is maybe the most damaging part. Presidents generally only work effectively for about the first 3 years. By the final 2, they're typically struggling with this internal collapse.
You mean intra-party fighting?
Crippling intra-party strifes and inevitably corruption scandals involving family or close aides. They become instant lame ducks. They lose loyalty. They lose effectiveness because their supporters are already looking to the next race.
So the system simultaneously concentrates this immense, almost imperial power in the office.
And severely limits the president's ability to use that power effectively for the national good across the full 5 years. It's a built-in contradiction.
And that structural deficiency, this weak, concentrated, single-term office, it seems to be enabled by the cultural expectation for a leader to exercise personal, centralized power.
That's where the Confucian undercurrent comes in.
Right. How does the deep influence of these traditional values clash with the expectation of a Western-style procedural democracy?
Well, you have to remember that Confucianism historically prioritizes a hierarchical society. And in that kind of society, power becomes personalized. It often just overrides formal regulations. The ideal ruler leads by inner virtue, or day, focusing on social order and stability. In this cultural context, governance runs much more by the influence of persons, their connections, their loyalties, than by formal, impartial institutions.
This sounds like a gravitational pull toward one-man rule. Regardless of the democratic structure, the cultural expectation, and often the leader's behavior, it just defaults to this centralized imperial style.
It creates an irresistible temptation. Even presidents who achieved power as democracy fighters like Kim Young-sam and Kim Dae-jung, they quickly adopted an imperial style once they were in office.
So the formal rules of accountability are just overpowered by these informal norms of clientelism, cronyism, and personalism.
Yes. Ultimately, what the democracy becomes is largely determined not by its checks and balances, but by what the president wished it to become.
If the rule of law is constantly being subordinated to personal loyalty, then this entire dynamic must play out in appointments and patronage. And nowhere is that more corrosive than in the permanent political divide of regionalism.
Regionalism is absolutely central. It's consistently identified as the single most important factor in presidential and parliamentary elections for decades. 1987, 92, 97, 2000, 2004, 2007, 2012. It's a geographic loyalty that operates almost independently of policy or ideology.
Can you describe the nature of that historical split for us? Because it really defines the political map.
The foundational division is between the conservative southeastern Gyeongsang region, often called Yeongnam, and the progressive southwestern Chola region, or Honam.
And this divide is fiercely entrenched.
Incredibly. In the pivotal 1987 presidential election, which was the big transition to democracy, Roh Tae-woo got an overwhelming 68.1% of the vote in his home region. Meanwhile, his rival, Kim Dae-jung, got almost nothing there.
But he made up for it in his own region.
Oh, he countered with nearly unanimous backing in the Chola provinces. He got 88.4% that year, and an astonishing 95% in his native Gwangju in 1992.
Those numbers just illustrate that voters aren't choosing based on tax policy or foreign relations. They're voting based on this blind loyalty to a regional figurehead.
Correct. And this deeply entrenched geographic loyalty effectively silences other interests. Interests based on class or gender or ideology. They're all marginalized.
Yeah.
It forces voters into these binary choices and severely undermines the whole representative function of democracy.
The tragic irony, as we mentioned, is that the very leaders who pledge national unity once they get that imperial presidency end up deepening the divide through their appointments.
Let's look at the hypocrisy of appointment, starting with Kim Young-sam.
Right. As the first civilian president since the 60s, he came in with so much pressure, so much promise, he explicitly vowed to demolish regional confrontation.
Yet, once in office, he immediately reverted to rewarding his personal pace. He installed loyalists from his own Pusan South Gyeongsang province, known as PK, in absolutely crucial posts.
And we're talking about roles that control the instruments of state power.
Exactly. He appointed PK supporters as Minister of Justice, Director of the National Police Agency, Prosecutor General, and Head of the National Tax Administration. These are the positions that control law enforcement, investigations, and money.
So by centralizing decision-making within his regional clique, he just aggravated the very thing he promised to cure.
He did. He signaled to the rest of the country that the presidency was still primarily a tool for regional patronage.
And what happened when Kim Dae-jung, the lifelong champion of democratic struggle, finally won in '97? Did he break the cycle?
It's a striking similarity. He did not. Kim Dae-jung also pledged national reconciliation and promised not to repeat the mistakes of regional favoritism. But his administration, too, excessively relied on loyal, long-term political vassals, overwhelmingly from his native Chola region.
So he rewarded loyalty over expertise, just replacing one regional clique with another.
That's precisely what happened. We saw Chola native appointees placed in high-leverage roles like the National Tax Office, the Prosecutor General, the National Police Agency Director, the National Intelligence Agency.
The whole coercive and financial machinery of the state.
By filling it with loyalists from his home region, he alienated the public, he undermined his own reform goals, and he reinforced the perception that the transfer of power was just the transfer of an imperial authority from one regional boss to another.
It sounds like a depressing revolving door. Did President Lee Moon-young follow the same pattern?
He did. The trend persisted. While his initial appointments showed some balance, analyses of his later nominations showed a consistent return to this norm. The heads of key offices, the General Prosecutor's Office, the National Tax Administration, began to reflect the president's wishes for those from his Yeongnam region.
It just demonstrates that the cultural pull of this personalized regional loyalty is powerful enough to undercut the reform pledges of nearly every administration since 1987.
It's a powerful force.
This cultural framework, where personal loyalty trumps institutional rules, it leads us directly to the institutional mechanism that enforces this whole zero-sum game. The Korean Prosecutor's Office.
Is the linchpin.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The Korean prosecutorial system is based on the continental European tradition. That means it emphasizes strict hierarchical accountability and bureaucratic rules.
Which sounds orderly on paper.
It does.
Yeah.
But in practice, this rigid structure allows the upper echelons, and critically the politicians who appoint them, to exert firm political control over the entire system, right down to individual cases.
So the system is structurally designed to be centralized, which makes it incredibly easy for political actors to weaponize it just by influencing the very top.
Exactly. And this is amplified by the sheer power they wield. Prosecutors have a charging monopoly, meaning they alone decide whether to press criminal charges.
And they have discretion.
A lot of discretion. It's based on the opportunity principle, which lets them consider things like the public interest when deciding not to prosecute, even if there's evidence of guilt. This grants them immense power to selectively prosecute.
And that selectivity is often dictated by the internal culture and, well, politics. How does the career advancement system mold a prosecutor's behavior?
The promotion system is the primary lever of political control. A prosecutor's career path, which branch they work in, cases they're assigned, is explicitly molded by their superiors. This system encourages them to, gratify the wishes of those in power.
Because the elite positions are highly desirable.
Very. Especially in the special investigation departments that handle politically sensitive cases. Loyalty, political connections, and, yes, even shared geographic or academic backgrounds are vital for success. Senior prosecutors consistently favor those from their own provinces and universities.
It creates this internal machine that prioritizes connection over impartial justice. And the political elite maintain a powerful, almost unofficial control point right inside the presidency itself.
That control point is the Senior Secretary for Civil Affairs, the SSCA, within the Presidential Secretariat. Korean presidents customarily employ elite prosecutors in this extremely powerful, yet often informal role.
And what does this SSCA actually do?
On paper, they oversee anti-corruption, civil servant discipline, and judicial affairs. In reality, this position informally oversees and controls every single investigative agency in the country, including the prosecution and the police.
That sounds like a complete end run around the formal system of checks and balances.
It's the ultimate palace mechanism for centralized control. The role has been compared, chillingly, to the eunuchs of the royal palace during the old Joseon dynasty.
Wow.
Because it suggests this mechanism grants unofficial, centralized control over the instruments of coercion, bypassing formal accountability entirely.
It's a mechanism for personalized, almost imperial control. It's so valuable that even when the current president briefly abolished the post for transparency, he eventually revived it.
It just shows the power of the person over the institution. Why rely on a slow, accountable bureaucracy when you can have a trusted palace insider who can immediately initiate or stall politically sensitive investigations? It's too valuable a tool to discard.
Now we get to the financial engine that fuels this zero-sum game, the ubiquity of corruption and how it provides the justification for targeting opponents. Where does the money come from?
The political corruption is typically facilitated by large companies creating secret funds, or bossism. These are off-the-books accounts used to funnel cash to politicians for favors.
And on the demand side, the campaign finance laws are extremely strict.
They are. They were inherited from the authoritarian era specifically to suppress the opposition.
So those strict laws create a political environment where funding a challenge legally is incredibly difficult.
Exactly. It creates an enormous incumbency advantage and forces challengers to seek illicit funds just to compete, which makes them instantly vulnerable. And this leads to the key insight. Because the laws couldn't keep pace with the hyper-rapid economic development, virtually every major company, and by extension, everyone has skeletons in the closet.
So the laws are so strict they are virtually impossible to follow, meaning almost every politician and business person is technically vulnerable to prosecution if the political will is there to go after them?
That's the structural vulnerability that enables the zero-sum game. A former prosecutor is quoted rationalizing the system by saying, so you can choose who to prosecute. The rationale is that if you search any major company, you will find something illegal.
Which allows the prosecutor's office, and by extension the new administration, the flexibility to select targets based purely on political utility. And that just fuels the retribution cycle.
And this high-stakes cycle of retribution is what defines the end of every single presidential term. Let's trace the historical consequences through the trials of former presidents, starting with Chen Du-hwan and Roh Tae-woo in the mid-90s.
Those trials were a national drama.
Oh, they were. Chen Du-hwan was charged with having over $1 billion slush fund. Roh Tae-woo had amassed $650 million. And they were also prosecuted for historical crimes, the 1979 mutiny and treason for the 1980 Gwangju uprising.
And the government didn't even want to prosecute it first, right?
Not at all. It was spurred by massive protests from civic groups demanding accountability after the government initially refused to prosecute, citing the statute of limitations.
So public pressure finally forced the hand of the incumbent president, Kim Young-sam. But even this popular measure was mired in political cynicism.
Immensely so. While the arrests were wildly popular, the opposition leader Kim Dae-jung openly charged that Kim Young-sam himself had received significant campaign funds from Roh Tae-woo. So many insiders claimed the unspoken purpose of the indictments was for Kim Young-sam to deflect attention from suspicions that he was also implicated. The whole process, while achieving some justice, seriously shattered the images as well as the authority of the Korean presidency itself.
The office itself was diminished, and this culture of retribution extended beyond political rivals and into the press that dared to criticize the administration.
Look at the Kim Dae-jung administration's anti-media campaign. This happened when his popularity was declining. Despite his reputation as a democratic fighter, his administration waged this coordinated media reform campaign against critical newspapers like Chosun Ilbo and Donghae Ilbo.
And how did they do it? They didn't prosecute them for libel.
No, they used aggressive, politically motivated tax evasion investigations.
And the result?
The government imposed massive fines, millions of dollars, on these newspapers. It was widely seen as politically motivated retaliation to intimidate the media. It deeply damaged Kim's image and showed the irresistible temptation of the Imperial Presidency to deploy state coercion against its perceived enemies.
Finally, the tragic fate of Roh Moo-hyun serves as the starkest warning of the personal cost of this game.
Absolutely. When the conservative Lee Myung-bak administration took power, they launched an intensive investigation into corruption allegations during Roh's time in office. Right. The intense political pressure and public shaming, which focused on his family, eventually contributed to the former president's suicide in 2009.
It just underscores the immense personal price of the retribution cycle. Avoiding a prison cell becomes the primary objective of gaining and holding the presidency.
It transforms political transitions from a democratic process into a matter of existential survival.
We've established that South Korea's path to democracy has led to this violent cycle of retribution. This begs the question, is this political volatility an inevitable consequence of applying Western democracy models in an East Asian context?
And to answer that, we have to compare Korea with another highly developed Confucian-influenced society, Singapore, which followed a very different path.
Singapore provides that crucial comparative benchmark.
It does. While sharing a similar cultural background that values hierarchy and order, its political development is fundamentally divergent. The key difference is something called regime endogeneity.
Meaning?
Singapore's regime emerged through internal legitimacy. It has deep local roots and was independent of substantial, continuous external backing from Western powers. This gave it remarkable autonomy over its own political development model.
So if South Korea was an exogenous regime, heavily reliant on outside support, which made it vulnerable to international pressure for democratic reform.
Singapore was able to chart its own course without that pressure.
Yeah.
It was able to pursue a model of authoritarian modernization. It didn't fight modernization, it controlled it.
So economic growth and education were all managed to strengthen non-democratic rule.
Precisely. The governing party argued that economic prosperity, rather than breeding demands for political liberalization, should reinforce regime support, and their rapid economic success and stable society served to bolster their legitimacy.
So instead of modernization creating a demanding middle class that asks for more liberal freedoms, the regime channels that success back into regime support.
And that stability is championed as the core virtue. Singapore successfully resists external pressure for rapid democratic reform, prioritizing technocratic planning and long-term vision. This is the essence of their meritocratic governance.
So the system explicitly champions social order and technocratic efficiency over procedural battles and short-term elections.
And you can see this in specific policy areas. Housing is a perfect example. South Korea's housing policy is often subject to wild swings every 5 years, leading to boom-bust cycles and extreme volatility.
Right.
In contrast, Singapore's Housing and Development Board has executed massive, decades-long public housing plans with immense stability and continuity, providing subsidized, high-quality housing for over 80% of its population.
A continuity that's only possible because they decouple these long-term necessities from short-term political pressures. They can think beyond 5 years.
And this highlights the difference in political outcomes. Why did similar cultural backgrounds lead to such divergent systems?
In South Korea, that reliance on external support meant international pressure amplified domestic demands for democracy as modernization created an educated, demanding populace.
Right. The state's capacity to suppress was eventually outweighed by the costs, forcing this fast, maybe premature adoption of democratic forms.
Whereas in Singapore, their internal strength allowed the leadership to leverage those same Confucian values, authority, hierarchy, the collective over the individual to maintain political control.
Exactly. They channeled economic success into legitimacy, they avoided the volatility, and they achieved long-term policy coherence. It just demonstrates that the outcome depends less on whether a society is monolithically Confucian and far more on the regime's origin and its ability to manage these pressures.
And the immediate painful consequences of Korea's unstable trajectory are visible in the current extreme levels of polarization and deep distrust. Let's look at the current state of social cohesion.
The data post-pandemic is striking. Social cohesion has declined dramatically, averaging only 4.2 on a 10-point scale in 2022. That's a significant drop from 4.59 in 2021. The sense of national unity just collapsed.
And the driving force behind this erosion is clearly the ideological zero-sum conflict.
Absolutely. The conflict between progressives and conservatives is viewed as the most severe social conflict by an overwhelming 92.3% of respondents.
92%. That's basically a societal consensus that the political divide is actively destroying the national fabric.
And it's no longer abstract. It's infected personal life. A remarkable 58.2% of respondents stated they would not date or marry someone with different political views.
That is a staggering metric. It shows how the political zero-sum game has infected the deepest, most personal social connections. People are essentially politicizing who they'll start a family with.
It speaks to the existential nature of the conflict. If your opposition isn't just wrong on policy, but is seen as a fundamental threat to the nation, compromise becomes impossible. And this polarization translates directly into a profound institutional trust deficit.
Where is that distrust most heavily concentrated?
In the very institutions designed to manage this conflict. The National Assembly, the central mechanism for compromise and representation, is the least trusted institution in the country. Only 21.1% of respondents expressed trust.
And the rest?
74.1% indicated outright distrust. This highlights the systemic failure of the legislature to mediate conflicts and function as a check on the executive. It's a devastating failure of horizontal accountability.
Which brings us right back to the institutional flaws we identified at the very beginning of this dive. We've spent this deep dive tracing the roots of South Korea's political volatility, confirming that the issues go far beyond just bad luck with specific leaders. We see a system suffering from these deep systemic flaws.
An imperial presidency clashing with a hierarchical culture, a political landscape focused on regional division, and a judicial system that's structurally designed to be weaponized.
And this relentless internal zero-sum conflict, coupled with institutional deficiencies like unilateral lawmaking and volatile parties, it fundamentally undermines the promise of a substantive, consolidated liberal democracy.
The evidence clearly shows that just establishing the democratic procedures holding elections, achieving civilian control, that's merely the first essential step. The true difficulty lies in normalizing the behavioral commitment to democracy.
Without that unwavering fidelity to the rule of law and an elite culture that embraces compromise, the system just remains fragile.
Perpetually waiting for the next leader to seize the levers of personalized power.
The central paradox remains. South Korea is a society that has achieved phenomenal global success and embraced the institutional form of democracy, yet it remains unconsolidated, repeatedly sacrificing principles of accountability and compromise for short-term political survival.
The struggle for a lasting, high-quality democracy in South Korea just demonstrates how profoundly difficult it is to replace centuries of historical and cultural norms that favor personalized power with genuine institutional resilience.
The volatile and retaliatory political cycle is the direct result of political actors just failing to move beyond that zero-sum notion that prevails in conflict resolution.
And that failure is what's hindering the nation's democratic maturity.
The lesson here is that form does not guarantee function. You can install the engine of democracy, but if the political culture is still running on the fuel of ancient personalized loyalties, the machine will always vibrate itself apart.